everybody. This is Michael speaking, or otherwise known as Justice Mike. And this is the first episode of the BLM London show. And today we have a special guest for you, and that is Miss Jane Elliott. So, Jane, how are you?
Well, that depends on what I say in the next 20 minutes, doesn't it? Then you'll know how I am. What I am is really angry and really disgusted. So other than that, I'm fine.
So I know that obviously the last few months or so has been very challenging times, to say the least, with the whole lockdown, with the whole protesting, with the movement. So first off, obviously, I wanted to get your thoughts on, like, what was your views on the whole situation, on the movement and things like that, what's been going on?
The movement is absolutely essential and has to be continued. The movement is exactly what Frederick Douglass told us to do. And if you don't know who Frederick Douglass was, you better look him up, because he was an absolutely brilliant black man. And this is what Frederick Douglass said. And I'll read it because I don't dare just recite it. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them, and these will continue till they are resisted with either words or blows or with both. The limits of tyrants are prescribed by the endurance of those whom they oppress. Now, we have oppressed in this country Black people, Native American, people of color, but particularly Black people, long enough. And now, finally, white people have seen on television over and over what Black people have been seeing all these years. Now they can no longer deny it. Now they're having to admit that it's happening, and they know that they have to do something about it. I think these protests are the beginning of the end for racism in this country.
So do you believe what's happened with George Floyd is going to have a big change compared to what's happened in the previous times?
I think it's going to have a bigger change than white people want it to have, but there's something very frightening about the way white people are using this, about the way the networks are using this. They are showing that black man lying on the ground with a policeman, a white policeman's knee on his neck for over 9 minutes, over and over and over again. Now, people say they're doing that so we can see how ugly it is. And I say, we saw how ugly it was the first time. They are doing that, in my estimation. Whether or not they mean to do that, what they are doing is intimidating young Black boys and their mothers. Black boys watching that are being sent the message, this is what can happen to you if you run afoul of the police, and the police can do whatever they want to you. And you need to realize that this is what they can do. And then they have shown the picture of that white policeman shooting that black man in the back a week later. And then while he's lying there dying, kicking him while he's dying. And they have shown that over and over and over. I don't think they're doing that in the best interest of the Black community. I think that they are doing that to intimidate Black mothers and their children. That's got to be terrifying to a little 5, 7, 10, 12, 14-year-old Black male to see that happen over and over at the hands of a member of the police department who are supposedly there to protect and defend us. I think they're using that deliberately now. People will say that's not the reason they're doing it. It doesn't matter what you meant by what you did or what you said. What matters is how it is perceived. And I perceive that as attempted intimidation. And it works. I talked to a woman this morning who's married to a Black man, and she said, my husband won't watch it. He says, turn it off the minute it comes on. He said, I've seen that enough. Well, he's absolutely right. If he has children, they'd better turn it off. He should not be exposing his children to that scene over and over again. It's time to stop it now. They can say, if you want to see this ugliness, Google it. And a whole lot of white folks will Google it because they'll want to see it. But every Black child should not have to be exposed to that on a daily basis in the United States.
So, earlier on, you were saying that now, you've seen a lot of white people now kind of seeing the realities of what's really going on. So with those people, because part of our London, BLM group, we've got a lot of white people on there who've witnessed it, who want to kind of join, and they are interested in, finding out about what they can do. So what advice would you give to those people who are just kind of tuning in now to what's going on and they want to get involved? What would be the first things you would like to say to those people?
The first thing I would suggest that they do is call the networks every time somebody, some educated, erudite, sophisticated commentator says, all those, there are people of all races out in the street protesting this. People of all races. Now, wait a minute. There's only one race of people on the face of the earth, and that's the human race. There are lots of different color groups, but there's only one race. We've got to take out of our vocabulary word things like all races, a number of races, and we've got to take out the word biracial. Because when somebody says to me, I'm biracial, I say, oh, really? Which of your parents came from outer space? Because you can't be biracial if both your parents came from planet Earth, because there's only one race on planet Earth. What we have to do is get rid of the education in this country that teaches that there are more than one, that there's more than one race. There's only one race of human beings. So the first thing we have to do is change our vocabulary and stop using the vocabulary of the 16th and 17th century to deal with 21st century problems. Racism doesn't have to be a problem. If you realize that every person on the face of the earth is my 30th to 50th cousin, and that includes you, whether or not you want to be my 30th to 50th cousin, you are, because we have the same ancestor back there 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. The first thing we have to do is get rid of the idea of 3 or 4 different races and implant in these kids' heads pre-birth. We have to teach people that there's only one race, the human race. That's the first thing to do. The second thing, people of those who call themselves adults, and Donald Trump isn't among that group. You understand that. He will never be an adult, but he pretends to be. Yeah, he pretends to be. These adults need to go to my website, and there are some printed language materials there, printed learning materials that everybody needs to take a look at. The first is a set of typical statements the white folks make that think they aren't racist. The second is a set of clarifications of those statements. And the third is a set of commitments to combat racism. 18 things you can do in your own environment to deal with your own racism. Go through that list, check those that you have done yes, check those you haven't done no, then go back and circle one that you check no, put the date beside it, and decide to do it for a month. We can change the level of racism in this country. In 2 generations, we could kill racism. I'm wearing a sweatshirt on which it says, God made the human race. Human beings created racism. You're not born a racist. There is no gene for racism. There's no gene for bigotry. Those are things you have to be carefully taught. And I, as an educator, know exactly how to teach racism. All you have to do is have a social studies programs that say that the only important things that were done on the face of the earth were done by white males. And it helps if you send your kids to Sunday school and they can see a white Jesus, which he wasn't. But we can change the color of Jesus Christ simply because we know how to do it and we have the power to do it.
So yeah, so I mean, like, obviously you're going into like the courses that you teach. So obviously one of the most popular courses that we've obviously seen amongst the years, I've personally seen it. I saw the Oprah Winfrey show when you done that course, when you're doing about the colors of the eyes. So I just wanted to find out personally, and obviously I'm sure a lot of people would like to know, like, how did that come about? Like, when did you come with the idea, and how did it come about for that? Because I think that's very impressive. I've seen it numerous of times.
Look, I was born the same year that Franklin Roosevelt and Adolf Hitler came to power in their respective countries. I was born in 1933. So from 1933 until 1945, I watched and heard my father angry about what Adolf Hitler was doing in Germany and then all over Europe. And my father would come home from the newsreels just absolutely incensed about what he saw that man do. Now, today, we have a so-called leader in the so-called White House in the United States of America who is emulating Adolf Hitler. The things that he's doing are those that he learned from reading the writings of Adolf Hitler. You need to realize that. Nobody understands that, but that's what's going on. I watched ugly things happen in those years with the Holocaust, and then our minds were off racism at that time. And suddenly our minds are on racism because here come all these black men back from the service, back from serving in the Second World War, and they've seen things that they never expected to see, and they've learned things they never expected to learn, and they expect to go to school on the GI Bill just like everybody else. And at that point, racism in this country absolutely exploded. And in the 60s, it was finally we were into the civil rights movement. It took that long to get us into the civil rights movement. We were making pretty good progress. And then we had 8 years of a black man in the White House. And racist people decided that would never happen again. And people like Mitch McConnell said, we're going to see to it that he doesn't get elected. He got elected. Then he said, we're going to see to it that he isn't successful. He's successful. Then he got reelected. Then he was as successful as he could be against all the racism that was enacted against him during his time there. And so as a result of that racism and the frustration of those white people at having a black man in the White House is the reason we have somebody who is totally unfit for that job. If you think racism is an important issue in this country, you need to realize racism is the #1 signal of the ignorance of the American population. And it is the #1 problem that affects everything that happens in this country is affected by racism, because racism is a moneymaker. It's a good thing to have people opposed to one another, because that way you don't have to spend as much money on the schools in black districts. You don't have to have as good transportation in those areas. You don't have to have as good housing in those areas. You don't have to have supermarkets in those areas. You can make money by prohibiting people from learning, prohibiting people from getting good diet, good food, good nutrition. We use race in this country to determine everything we do is in some way affected by the racism in this country.
So in regards to like what you're saying in regards to the racism in the country and, you know, starting from the top down, I mean, like, I know that you've done like diversity classes, you know, since the 70s and onwards. Have you find that when you're going into corporations, you're seeing that minds are starting to change? Because like, for example, you know, with the Washington Redskins, you know, you're getting major corporations putting pressure on people doing it. Are you seeing changes from what your sessions are doing, or do you think that's just, you know, a ploy, or, what's your views on that?
Well, the fact that they've changed the name of the Washington Redskins, that's a step in the right direction. However, you have to realize that right now, blacks want reparations for what happened to blacks as slaves. I think that's a good idea. But first, we have to make reparations to the First Nations people who were killed, their women were raped, their children were shot, their lands were taken from them, and they were put on reservations out in the middle of nowhere. Right now, a huge number of the members of the Navajo group are dying of COVID-19 because they're 100 miles from a hospital. They don't have electricity, they don't have running water, and they're still living on dirt floors. So if we're going to give reparations, we have to start by giving them to the First Nations people. Then we'll talk about giving them to the next group and the next group and the next group. But you see, during the civil rights movement, while the civil rights movement was going strong, all of a sudden, the women's movement popped up. Mostly a white women's movement. They might as well have been carrying signs that said black women need not apply. The women's movement was allowed to happen because it took the emphasis off the civil rights movement. It was a purely racist thing to do. And so now we have affirmative action. The people who get the most advantage out of affirmative action programs are white women. And that's the way it has been, and that's the way it will be. I think people, in fact, I know people don't realize how pervasive racism is. Everybody should read this book, The Color of Law, because if you do, you'll find out that in this country, we have segregation not because people want to be segregated, but because the people who write the laws and who have written the laws in the past learned the same thing that I learned, which was white people need to be separate from those who are other than white because they aren't as good as. That's a lie, but that's what we've learned for 400 years in this country. We need to realize that those people who write the laws and those people who are writing the laws now don't know any better. They only know what they learned in school, and what they learned in school is the rightness of whiteness. We're still teaching it. Until we stop teaching that, until we change the education in this country, we're going to continue to have blatant racism, and that's what we have.
In regards to the school system, I know in the UK that's something that we kind of looking for a lot, because like I say, the history is not the complete full history. we're only getting part of the history. So in regards to, or because you being a teacher as well, you know, all the way from the beginning up until this point, you're saying that we're still getting kind of indoctrinated still. Have you seen improvement from over the years in regards to how they're teaching history, especially Black history?
If I had seen improvement, we wouldn't have Donosaurus T. Rump in the White House. His presence in the White House proves that we haven't taken great strides. And people think it's wonderful now, white folks think, isn't it wonderful? We've given them a whole month of Black history. Wait a minute. If you haven't read Anthony Browder's book, Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, you don't know anything about Black history. You see, in this country, Black history begins with slavery. Black history began 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ. Black people in the Nile Valley, which is in Egypt, but you need to remember that Egypt is a country in Africa. We white folks have moved it into the Middle East, so we don't have to admit that all those wonderful things we got from the Egyptians, we got from Black people. So we just pretend they're in the Middle East. No, they aren't. Egypt is a country in Africa. They were doing, Black people in the Nile Valley were doing cataract surgery with metal instruments before there was such a thing in the UK or in Europe. People need to know those things. If you're going to know Black history, you have to know all of Black history and not just the last, 300 years? That constitutes no Black history at all, because that is sifted through the white idea of what we need to teach these kids to make them good American citizens. We've got to have them learn the right things, and that means learn the white things. I'm sorry, but because I've been an educator for a lot of years, and I've watched it happen, and I was a party to it happening, and I agreed to go along maybe a couple of times, and then I decided, well, this is ridiculous. And so I taught against the mores of the community and taught that it's all right not to be white in my third grade classroom. And that got me into a lot of trouble. But the students who went through the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise at my hands are better citizens of this country today and better citizens of the world than they would have been without that exercise. The danger of saying that is now some white person is going to say, well, if that's good for little white people to go through it for a day, it must be really good to do it to Black people for a lifetime. That's how foolish we are in this country about race. When we show that film that was done in my classroom, the third year I did the exercise, white people say, how can you do that to those poor little children? Don't you think you could damage them? And I say, wait a minute. Those kids had that for one day with one teacher in an enclosed classroom. Nobody else was allowed to get in on it. The second day, it was still the same situation, but we reversed the exercise. They know that it's going to end at the end of the day. If you're concerned about the damage that's done to those little white kids in one day, you must be absolutely infuriated by what happens to people of color in your country and mine. And I've had the women who, usually white women say that, and when I make that point, they'll say, that's different. They're used to it. They can take it. In other words, young Black children can get used to being treated badly. Because, you see, we really think that Black people are stronger than white people. We think that Black children are stronger than white children because Black children are used to it. They can take it. Nobody should have to get used to it because nobody should have to take it. But if it's all right to do it to a Black child for a lifetime, pre-birth until post-mortem, that's how long we carry this on in this country. There are still cemeteries in the southern part of the United States where Blacks aren't allowed to be buried in anything but the Black cemetery. Now think about how really ridiculous and really ignorant and really, I don't think they're stupid, because you can't fix stupid. You can fix ignorance, and we need to fix that ignorance. But we do this on a daily basis in this country. When we see it happen to a white child, we're absolutely appalled for a day. When we see it happen to a Black child, well, they're used to it. They can take it.
In the UK, like obviously in the States as well, but you know, a lot of people like to confuse ignorance, racist with ignorance. So someone says an ignorant comment to a Black person, but then they can easily get confused with racist. Do you find that the difference between the two, or do you find two of the same? If someone's ignorant, that means they're a racist.
Well, if you aren't ignorant, if you aren't a racist, if you went through schools, if you finished high school in the United States of America and you aren't a racist, you need to go back and take the program over again. Because that's what we teach in our interestingly ignorant way. If we taught the truth about history, we wouldn't need a Black History Month, because Black history, the history of what Blacks have done, would be included every day in the social studies program. In this country, if you haven't learned to be a racist by the time you graduate from high school, you're not a miracle. You're really hard to teach. That is the course here. That is the course that we offer. When I was, I don't know if I probably said this before, when I was a freshman in college taking elementary education, social studies education, the professor stood at the front of the class and said to these 19 to 21-year-olds, when you get into the classroom, you must not teach in opposition to the local mores, M-O-R-E-S. The people who are paying your wages through their taxes have the right to have their children learn what they want them to learn. And I was 19 years old, and I thought, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. How can you say something like that? Did I attack him for it? Absolutely not, because I knew I didn't have the power to say anything, and I wanted to pass the course, so I just nodded and smiled, just like everybody else did. And then when I got in the classroom, I taught in opposition to the local mores, and that has gotten me in a lot of trouble. But I think that every teacher should teach in opposition to racism. And if racism is what is in your community, and you're teaching children from that community, you have to teach in opposition to racism, because you are there as an educator, not as a teacher. I'm an educator. An educator, the word educator comes from the duck deuce, which means lead, the prefix E, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does. An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. She isn't there to provide facts and figures and get kids ready for the end of term testing. She is there to lead people out of ignorance. And you can't lead people out of ignorance if you allow them to continue to believe that there are 3 or 4 different races based on skin color on the face of the earth, because there aren't. There's only one, and that's the human race.
So I've got a couple more questions, and I'll pass it on to the group, because I know they've got 1 or 2 questions I want to ask you. You know, obviously, in regards to the early days when you was teaching, you know, the classes about the different color of eyes, obviously you received a lot of backlash. And, you know, people was, you know, not hating it back then. And you said that, you know, 90% of the people hated you, you know, and I listened to you. But now, doing your teachings now and doing your courses now, do you find you still get the same amount of hate, or do you think that you're getting more love and appreciation now in regards to what you're doing, your contribution?
Well, right now, you see, white people are scared, really scared in the United States of America. Because they have found out, and it's in the demographics of this country, that within 30 years, white people will become a numerical minority in the United States. So now, when I do a college class, when I do a college group, and this happened when I was on the stage with Angela Davis last fall, a white woman, and this was 1,500 students at the University of Houston, and a woman in the front row, of course, it's always a white woman, said, well, if they get power, and I knew who the they was that she was talking about, because half the audience was Black. If they get power, aren't they going to want to get even with us? And I said, you think all these Black folks want to get even with all white folks? So yes. I said, well, let's find out. I said, well, every person in this room who considers himself or herself a member of the Black race and who wants to get even with all white folks, please stand. She watched, and 3 young Black males stood. The rest of them all turned and looked at those guys like, are you crazy? And I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us. And she began to relax. She says, oh, that's good. I said, yeah, that's really good. But let's be honest about this, shall we? Well, every Black person in this room who would like to get even with 1 or 2 white people, please stand. Every one of them jumped up, leaped up, yelling and cheering and high-fiving and applauding and just absolutely delighted. And I said, see, they don't want to get even with all of us. But every one of them wants to get even with 1 or 2 of us. Now, if you want to be safe in the future, you treat people fairly in the present so that you aren't one of the 1 or 2 they want to get even with. Does that make sense to you? She said, yeah. And now she had gone back to being scared, because now she's going to have to change her behavior. She's going to have to treat people fairly. And what you do in the present constructs the future and will determine how you're treated in the future. I think that is, and I know that's the major fear of white people today, is they're afraid that when blacks get power, we're going to be on the receiving end of that which we have dished out. I don't think they have to worry that much about that, because the second day of the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise, the first time we did the exercise, the brown-eyed kids were on top the first day because I had blue eyes, and most of the students in the room had blue eyes. So I put the minority group members on top the first day. They really did a job on those blue-eyed people. My little white third graders, brown-eyed white third graders in Riceville, Iowa, knew exactly how to behave like a racist because they have had that training pre-birth, and they know how to do it. And they really laid into those little blue-eyed kids. The blue-eyed boys in the bathroom said, "We're going to get even with them. Wait until we're on the top. We're going to get even with them." So on Monday, I was afraid to go back to school because I was sure that I was going to have hell to pay rent to, because I knew that those little blue-eyed boys were going to be really vicious. Went into the room, we reversed the exercise. Blue-eyed people were on the top, brown-eyed people were on the bottom. Blue-eyed people were much less vicious to the brown-eyed people than the brown-eyed people had been to them. And on Tuesday, before we discussed the exercise at all, each child had to write a four-paragraph composition telling who Martin Luther King Jr. was, how the child felt on Friday, how the child felt on Monday, and what discrimination is. When they got done, we got in a circle. I said, "Now look, you blue-eyed boys said you were going to get even with these brown-eyed people. You didn't get even with them. Why didn't you?" And almost in a chorus, they said, "Because we found out how it feels to be treated that way, and I didn't want to make anybody feel the way I felt the day I was on the bottom." What we have to hope is that is what is going on in the minds of people of other color groups in this country. We have to hope and pray that they aren't as vicious and as ugly and as arrogant as white people are behaving right now. We have to hope that they don't want to get even. I think most people of color don't want to get even. I think they want to get equity. I think they want equal treatment under the law, which we are promised in the Constitution. And I think that's what they want. And I think they know the kind of dislocation you have in a society when you have one group that thinks they have the power and that thinks they have the right to run that power. As Frederick Douglass said, and we have to do what they're doing right now. This protesting is exactly what Frederick Douglass said. He said, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. Those who profess to favor freedom and yet deprecate agitation are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. Where justice is denied, as it is in our country. Where poverty is enforced, as it is and is getting worse because of COVID-19. Where ignorance prevails, absolutely, because we have a president that says it's all right to be ignorant. And where any one class is made to feel that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them, neither persons nor property will be safe. Now, when people of color get on top and white people are the minority, they are going to be in a situation where they think that society is an organized conspiracy to oppress, rob, and degrade them. Neither persons nor property will be safe. And at that time, it will be white people who are doing the rioting, white people who are doing the protesting. So we've got to change this thing now. These people who are out in the streets now are doing exactly what somebody should have been doing a long time ago. And they are not people of all different races out there. There are people of all different color groups, different religions, different genders, different sexual orientations, different sizes, different ages, but they all realize that this situation is absolutely untenable and it has to change.
Definitely, I agree. So what I'm going to do, Jane, is I'm going to pass it along to some of the guys because I know they've got some questions. They're dying to ask you a few questions. So I'm going to go in order, in alphabetical order. And Adria, I'm going to put you on. I know you've got questions you want to ask. So yeah, so when you're ready.
Hi, Jane. Thank you for being here. Really, really interesting to listen to you talk, and I've been a big fan for a long time. I've actually got a question from a group member, and her name is Sasha Martin, and she's asked me to ask you, how many more years do you think it's going to take before we really do have equality throughout our society? And do you believe this is even really possible?
Oh, absolutely, it's possible. I think within 15 years, we will have white people so educated to the fact that there's only one race. It'll take us 15 years, a good 15 years, because it takes us that long to start teaching kindergartners that there's only one race. And if we can do that, and then they go into first grade and we reinforce it and go on until they graduate from college, we will have a citizenry that knows the truth instead of the lie. And at that point, they will have enough years of saying, racism is wrong, we're not going to go along with it, these people are our cousins, we've got to protect our cousins, we've got to treat people fairly, we've got to live up to what's in our Constitution, most of it. We've got to do that. They are going to know, after having had 4 years of an absolute racist, sexist, ageist, homophobic, ethnocentric idiot in the White House, most of them have learned that we cannot go on this way. They have seen what a racist, what a really ignorant person looks like. The things he says, the things he does, and the things that his cohorts are saying and doing. My father used to say, a man is judged by the company he keeps, and the best of companies none too good. Well, people have seen the kind of company that this president keeps, and it's none too good. And he considers himself the best of company. So we need this ignorance is perfectly obvious to every person in the United States of America over the age of 10. They're all seeing this, and they're going to realize that we cannot perpetuate this nonsense. Those people who are out in the street protesting right now aren't just protesting what happened to those 2 black men. They're protesting what has happened to people of color from the day palefaces got to this continent. And they're protesting what has happened. They're protesting in a way that will keep it from happening in the future. And I think that can happen. I really do. However, the crime rate is up dreadfully, horribly in this country, particularly in cities like New York right now. And it's up because people are desperate. They don't have any money. They don't have any jobs. The government isn't going to come up with enough money to keep everybody having enough money to feed their children. So the crime rate is up drastically. And this president is going to blame that on people of color, because nobody is going to admit that it's in bad shape. We're in bad shape because of his bad decisions. But we're going to learn a lot in the next 2 months. I think you're going to see a fantastic number of people going to the polls in November. And I think that is going to turn this thing around.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Bebop, you got questions?
Indeed, I do. I've got a question on behalf of Jessa Grace, who asks, what is the #1 thing we can be doing for our children so that we foster compassion and curiosity rather than fear and judgment? Yes, we can model for them, but what else?
You have to educate them to the truth. And if you teach them the truth at home, when they go to school and some fool and teacher says something like, well, you know how black people are, that child needs to say, yeah, I do know, because part of my DNA, according to my mother, came from a country in Africa. So yeah, I know how we are, because we are all descendants of those first modern human beings that evolved in sub-Saharan Africa between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago. And when you abuse or accuse people of the black group being less than, you need to realize that part of me is part black. So I don't want to hear that anymore. I don't want to hear you refer to me as white. But look at me right now. Look at me. You see the color of my shirt? The color of my shirt is white. The color of my skin is not. There are no white people on the face of the earth. We do not come in that color, because every single human being on the face of the earth has in their DNA a certain percentage of DNA that came from a country in Africa. So let's get over the idea of white. Let's do this. Let's show this to our children. You see all these people on these pages? These pages came out of the National Geographic magazine for April of 2018. Everybody has to show that magazine to their children, because under each of these people is the word Pantone for the Pantone color wheel and a number on the color wheel. Every person's skin can find that color on the color wheel, and you have a number on the color wheel. There are no people pictured on this page who are this color, because this is not the color of skin. All these other colors are the color of skin, because we all came from those first modern human beings who evolved in sub-Saharan Africa and who were black. So when people say, well, I'm Caucasian, you say, and what does that mean? Well, I came from the Caucasus Mountain region. If you had evolved, if human beings had started in the Caucasus Mountain region, they couldn't have lived through the first winter. Do you not understand that? They wouldn't have had anything to cover them. They wouldn't have anything to eat. They would have died immediately. That was not a welcoming environment for human beings. And they didn't evolve there. We all came from the same place, a country in Africa. And then get that issue of the National Geographic magazine, April of 2018. And look at the cover. I have it right here. Just a minute. All right. See this? See these two girls? One's black and one's white, obviously. Now, would you say that these children, these two females, are biracial?
Possibly.
Would you say these two children? What?
Possibly. I don't agree with the term biracial, but yes, you know, they look like they could be related.
Of course, they aren't biracial, because there's only one race on the face of the earth. These two girls are members of the same race. They're people who came from the union of two different color groups, but not two different races. You've got to understand that when somebody walks up to me and says, I'm biracial, I immediately attack them with, which of your parents came from outer space? Because we're using terms from the 15th and 16th century to deal with 21st century problems, and we're using them to cause and to make worse 21st century problems. We've got to get rid of this idea. Then, on another page in this magazine is a picture of a map that shows where we started and how those brilliant black people moved from that area to populate land masses all over the world. Every human being on the face of the earth started in the same place. Children need to see this map. And there's another map that they need to see. Have you ever seen this map before?
Indeed.
Just like the map you're accustomed to seeing. See Greenland here, bigger than South America. This is the Mercator Projection Map. And on most of the Mercator Projections maps, there's a legend at the bottom. And on the legend, if you read it carefully, the last sentence says, South America is actually 9 times larger than Greenland. In fact, South America, little old South America, is 9 times larger than Greenland. This is the map that is used throughout the world to show the size, the shape, the location, and the importance of land masses on the face of the earth. We need to give this up. There's a better way. Have you seen this map?
I do believe I have, yes.
Yeah, now look at this map. Here is South America. Here's poor little Greenland. South America on this map is 9 times larger than Greenland. On this map, Canada stretches from hell to breakfast. Look at the size of that sucker. On this map, here's the size of Canada. Now, this map is fair to all the peoples of the world. This map is fair and isn't fair to white people. The countries on this map that we think of as being white countries take up 2/3 of the map. On this map, the equator is 2/3 of the way down the map. It doesn't divide that map into 2 equal parts. There's no northern and southern hemisphere because hemi means half. Divides it into 2/3 and 1/3. This one divides the map into 2 equal parts. You can teach hemisphere using this map. Now, people say, well, it's just a map. What's your problem? I say, because this is one of the ways we use to indoctrinate students for 12 years, K through 12, 13 years. And then when they get in high school and college, they still use this blooming map. Take a look at it. There's a choice there, and it's a cheap choice. Order copies of this map from odtmaps.com. You get copies of them and hang them on your wall. And when you have to do something like this, you'd better have a map of the world hanging on the wall that looks like the Peters Projection Map instead of the Mercator Map. And the really comical thing about it is all these wonderful people who tell us how the coronavirus. What is that?
Corona.
The virus, COVID-19. How COVID-19 is spread over the world. They use this map. For God's sake, isn't it time now for them to take a look at that and say to themselves, well, we're so brilliant, we'd ought to know that South America is 9 times larger than Greenland, and stop using this map. Would that make sense to you?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm quite interested in cartography, and I understand how the phases over time, and in respect to wars that have happened as well, how maps and atlases and so forth have been completely manipulated to disproportionately represent empirical values and empire states. So I think,
but if you start with kindergartners, you get them used to having their mental landscape manipulated. And so they are used to having that manipulation, so you can do it until they graduate from college. And there are those boys who are reading the news, probably all have many degrees, but they lack a degree of common sense. If they had any common sense, they would not allow that map to be shown behind them when they're telling the news, because it is another indication of our ignorance about even the map.
Absolutely. Thank you for answering that. I'm going to pass on now to Moji.
Hello, Jane.
There you are.
Hello, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for coming today. It's a pleasure, seriously. We're all great fans of yours, and this moment for us is epic. So I think most of the questions have been covered by Michael, because we raised quite a few before. Basically, I'm just going to say thank you for coming, and thank you for answering all the questions and just opening our eyes to a lot more that's going on, not only in the United States, but across the world, because a lot of people need to hear what you're actually saying. The only question I could ask is, why are not every white person like you? Because it would make the world a hell of a lot better place.
Well, but you see, what I've learned from people who look like you. What I have learned from people who write books about people, written by people like you, who know the truth. White people are encouraged not to know the truth. We are encouraged to know what makes us feel good. And that worked as long as we were in the majority. But what white people don't realize even today is that only 25% of the population of the earth is classified as white. 75% of the people on this earth are other than white. It's time for us to start realizing that the reason we even, number one, the reason we even have a population is because of Black people who started it. The reason there are white people on the earth is because there were a lot of Black people who left Africa and moved away from the equator and were brilliant enough to populate the earth without any modern technology. And so here we have these Black people who were doing fantastic things 4,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ that we have discounted or denied or ignored or flat out lied about for as long as I've been alive and as long as the United States has been in existence. We started that kind of education with slavery. Perhaps if it hadn't been for the Spanish Inquisition and Torquemada and company, this nastiness might never have happened. But during the Spanish Inquisition, they were trying to convert people to Catholicism, and they're good Christians, but they wanted to be Catholic, and they were killing people, and they didn't realize that you can't tell a person's religion by the way they look until they realized that they had killed quite a number of Christians. So they decided at that point they were going to have to find another way to decide who deserved to die. And they set upon skin color. It's that recent. It's only 500 or 600 years since this mess started. And when I was on the red table with, what's her name? You know who she is, and I've forgotten. Anyway, Will Smith's wife. She'll always just be Will Smith's wife because he's a hunk. Make no mistake about this, he's fantastic. So I was on the red table. That's the one. That's who it was. But the only thing that's important about her is she's Will Smith's wife. And we won't show this to.
It's a swear word around there now.
Anyway, yeah, we'll just. Ooh, anyway, I said to those three women, three Black women, a mother, a grandmother, and a daughter, and they had brought a white woman down from upstairs to give them the white women's perspective. And I thought, oh my, please, Don't do that. But they did it. I had nothing to do with that. I said to those three women, those three black women, that one white woman, how long do you think this has been going on, this racism? And they said, well, forever. It's always been like this. No, it hasn't been forever. It's only been between 500 and 600 years. Before that, it was all right to be whatever color you were because you were just a member of the human race. But we put together a system for treating people positively or negatively based on the color of their skin. We need to realize that during the Spanish Inquisition, everybody has to read the book, The Myth of Race by Robert Wald Sussman. And you have to read Anthony Browder's Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization. You don't understand how recent this nonsense came up until you read those two books, and you will not realize the amount of talent and energy and ambition and intelligence that we have wasted by denying that anybody who isn't white has all those characteristics. We have denied civilization tremendous amounts of progress and amounts of brilliance by pretending that only pale faces know what they're doing and know what they're talking about.
That's excellent. You've answered that more than I could even imagine, actually. And lastly, how have you found implementing your studies in other countries?
You can't even implement it in the United States, for heaven's sake. That is going to be, we could have gotten this done if Barack Obama had been followed by somebody different from the one who followed him. We could have made progress. We were making progress. But now we have taken steps so that we're about 40 years behind where we were when Barack Obama came to power. We're in a real bad situation. And what happens in my country will happen in yours and will happen all over the world, because until the last 4 years, the United States has been recognized as the leader of the Western world. If we're still the leader of the Western world, we're leading in the wrong direction. I've been doing this for 52 years. I'm seeing the same kinds of things happening in my country today that were happening when I did the exercise. And when I watch what's happening in my country today, I think, oh my God, they're running the eye color exercise based on skin color. Exactly what I did with my students, we are doing with people of color in this country today. Exactly what I did with my students. And when you read the book, read this book, just get this book. I don't get anything out of this. But the man who directed the film crew for A Class Divided, the reunion film with my third graders, and the first one, The Eye of the Storm, wrote this book, and some of the things that he says about what went on during and after this thing were just amazing, because he relates what happens with adults in society to what was happening with those kids during that exercise. And it's exactly what we see adults doing every day. It's what those kids did in reaction to being treated fairly, more than fairly and more than unfairly. It's absolutely amazing. You have to read that book. Everybody should read it. And if you think he doesn't know what he's talking about, then you have to listen to the foreword, which was written by Kenneth Clark, who was the black man, the black psychologist who did the black and white doll studies several years ago. And they've replicated those studies several times, and every time they get the same results. So things aren't changing as rapidly as they should. He says, a major and inescapable goal of educational institutions is to broaden the perspective of human beings, to develop a truly functional empathy, to free human beings from the constrictions of ignorance, superstition, hostility, and other forms of humanity. Jane Elliott's contribution, as described in this book, demonstrates that it is possible to educate and produce a class of human beings united by understanding, acceptance, and empathy. You can do that. If you educate properly, you can do that. The reason we are having these problems in this country today is because we do not educate. We do not lead people out of ignorance. We increase their ignorance and reinforce their ignorance and give them really good grades for remaining ignorant.
We've got one more question from Adria, and then we'll wrap it up, as I know you got some precious time.
Hi Jane, I know you originally, you started out, you was a school teacher, and I have a question from someone else as a school teacher. Kelly Louise. And she says, research has been done that proves the current systems of state and standardized testings in UK and US schools negatively affect Black and brown students and is a tool of white supremacy. This needs to change. Where do we start?
We start with kindergarten. If I were teaching kindergarten, if I were teaching preschool this year, but I'd certainly start in kindergarten, I would insist that every child in the room had a box of Crayola crayons with at least 50 crayons in it of different shades of brown. Crayola crayon made a box like that several years ago. I think there were only 30 crayons in it of different shades of brown. I would take out the white crayon and say, boys and girls, everybody take out this crayon. We're going to learn our colors today. This color is white. Now, put it against the back of your hand. Now, do you have skin that is the color of this? Because if you don't have skin this color, you aren't white. And that's what we're going to teach in this classroom and in this school and at every grade level. We are going to teach that we are all shades of brown. Here is the color wheel. I'd show them the color wheel and I'd say, now stand by the color wheel and let's see if we can find the color of your skin. And I would educate these students to realize that skin color is not a negative. It is natural. It is what we are. It cannot be changed. You cannot bleach it out and you can't force it in. So what we need to realize is that skin color, like eye color, can't be changed. Interestingly enough, I have had white, blue-eyed males in corporations, several corporations, come into the exercise wearing brown contact lenses for the day so that they wouldn't have to go through the blue-eyed exercise, brown-eyed exercise as blue-eyed people. They wouldn't have to put up with it because they had a way to avoid it. I know parents who have told me that their kids have tried to bleach their skin. Their Black children have tried to bleach their skin in order to be less dark-skinned. I have heard a Black mother say to her daughter, you stay out of the sun, you're Black enough. For the love of God, let people be what they are, respect them as they are, enjoy them as they are, and never, ever, ever allow a child to say to anyone, when I see you, I don't see you Black. And I have had people say that to Black people in front of me. Oh my God, I'll never forget the day some woman said that to Linda Guillory in front of me. And this woman said, when I see you, Linda, I don't see you Black. And I thought, oh, there's going to be bloodshed here. I've got to wear this suit tomorrow. So I backed up because I thought Linda was going to wipe her off the face of the earth. And instead, Linda Guillory, Black Linda Guillory, said to her very kindly, I think you have an eye problem. Let's make an appointment with the optometrist so that we can get your eyes fixed. We've got to start teaching children the things you do not say. And in order to teach them not to say those things, we have to wipe those things out of our vocabulary. Go to my website. Download the set of learning materials. The first page, read it. It's a set of typical statements the white folks make that think they are racist. The second page is a set of clarifications of those statements. The third page is a set of commitments to combat racism. Follow the directions and do what it says. And the fourth page is a bibliography. Read every book on that bibliography, white people. You will never know enough about people who are a different color as long as you think they are of a different race. Get over it. Nobody's born a racist. There's no gene for racism. There's no gene for bigotry. They've done studies in this country, and I think I've said this before, that prove that the longer you stay in school, the more bigoted you become. Because every year that you stay in school, you get reinforced in what you learn grades K through 12. So we have to be very careful about what we learn, what we teach, grades through 12.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you very much.
You're most welcome. Thank you for asking.
Well, Jane, I would like to say on behalf of all of BLM London and all of us here today that it's been a pleasure having you here talking about diversity and racism. And we'll love you to have you again soon, I hope. And I hope you enjoyed it too. And just one more thing I wanted to ask for everybody, on behalf of everybody in the BLM London group, is there any message that you would like to say to the BLM London group and for the people out there?
You are all my 30th to 50th cousins, and you all came from a Black person. Get over it. Enjoy yourselves. It truly is later than you think.
Well, thanks very much, Jane, for that. Much appreciated. And this is a wrap. Jane Elliott has been here today speaking, and for our first show. And yeah, I'd like to say thank you very much on behalf of everybody. And yeah, I'll let you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you
You're
very
most
much.
welcome. Thank you for having me. That's lovely. Really lovely. Thank you.
Pleasure.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been an absolute honor and privilege as well.
Take care. Stay safe.
Thank you.